Serious Redditors who live in secluded towns, what is the darkest thing that happened in your town, but is kept secret? A family friend was super drunk. He was walking home, and fell unconscious on the road at the bottom of a hill. Another family friend, small town so we all knew each other, was driving home late. He heard a thump, and a crunch, when he went over a hill. He got out of the car thinking he hit a wallaby or something. He instead found his friend dead. Everyone decided to forget what he did, because it really wasn't his fault. There was no way he could have seen him asleep at the bottom on the hill in the middle of the road. It was at such an angle, that the headlights didn't spot him. It's a bit weird this has come up, because I drove past a super drunk dude just a few hours ago on my way home from work. He was drunk, and stumbling on the road. He fell over, and lost a thong. Flip-flop to you Americans. I called the police and told them. They said they'd pick him up, and take him home where he would be safe. Didn't want a repeat of what happened back in my hometown, to happen to that random drunk guy. Yeah, an American thong would have made this a more interesting mental image. A cop was a child molester, and it was widely known. He went with a group hunting in the woods, and never came back. My town isn't very secluded, but I think this still works. So there is this building that used to be a hotel, and one day this guy shows up, and he takes multiple trips going in and out with a bunch of equipment. They found him a little while later in his room. He had assembled an entire guillotine, and cut his head off. Well, that's the first time I've ever done the mildly impressed how to a suicide story. In the 80s and early 90s my town was run completely by dirty cops. Drugs were run by the cops, and people who didn't do as they were told would go mysteriously missing, and eventually, most of them, wind up dead. It took the feds to clean the place up, and install a new set of clean cops. They're a tiny town in New Mexico a couple years back whose whole police force was dirty. One day they were arrested on various charges, and the only law enforcement official left was the police dog. Such a good boy, staying clean. They say the hardest part of training canine units is convincing the dog to snitch. Small town of about 2,000 to 2,500 in the Midwest, when suddenly about 1/4 of the population just up and left. No word, no nothing. None of them had kids or extended family, and none of the papers said anything about it. This was back in maybe the late 80s. This happened when I was pretty young, but I just remember one day one of my teachers wasn't there, and I found out from my parents a ton of people had just left overnight. Most personal belongings were taken with them, but mattresses and furniture were still in their houses. I still have no clue what that was about, and when I've asked my parents more recently, they said the rumor around town was that all those people worked for the CIA or FBI, and were reassigned all of a sudden. I would read the crap out of this book, whether fact-based or novel. The Society on Netflix is about a town where every single adult just disappeared after a storm. It's kind of like this if you're interested. Thanks. Over the summer there was a guy found hanging from a tree on the sheriff's property. The sheriff disliked this young man, and treated him poorly during his incarceration at the county jail. Many witnesses said that the day he got released from jail, the sheriff invited him to his secluded property, and told him he could help him get back on his feet. 2 days later, a couple of teenage boys fishing in a creek discovered the guy hanging in a tree. Authorities was notified. No investigation was done, and it was immediately ruled a suicide. This boy was a known drug addict with no family or friends, so there was really no one to press the issue. The local news wrote a small article on man found dead from apparent suicide, and then it was hush hush after that. It's just one of those things we will never know. That is uber fucked up. The doctor who tried all these wacky treatments to save his young patient from tuberculosis and became infatuated with her. After she died, he eventually robbed her grave, mummified her, and lived with her body for 7 years before being found out. Did not go to jail and lived his years out in town, I believe. Carl Tanzler and Alina de Hoyos. That story is one of few true crime ones I've read that kept me up at night. It's still happening in my town. This specific event happened directly in my gated neighborhood. A member of a Russian gang got his house shot up before they went inside to finish a job. My wife saw them drag out the body. Organized crime bosses live in my town and the 2 neighboring towns. I live in NJ. I was delivered by a serial killer doctor. I don't remember all the details, but he was killing patients in Canada. That's pretty metal right there. Not far from where my parents grew up is the town of Skidmore, Emma, which is honestly a supremely fucked up place of weird, sinister stuff. The most commonly known incident is from the 1980s when Ken McElroy was shot to death while sitting in his truck with his wife in front of the pool hall in town in broad daylight. There were dozens of witnesses who saw the shooting, which came from multiple firearms, but they denied seeing the shooting or who may have been responsible. The news stories from the time sort of painted McElroy as a town bully, almost like Biff from Back to the Future, except he was a fucking violent monster who had beaten, figuratively and literally, over a dozen charges including theft, rape of a minor, remember his wife, yep, she was one of the no rape victims, and carried Ken's child at 14, and other general violent acts, leading up to his town-sanctioned execution. He had the gall to appeal a 2-year sentence for shooting a geriatric grocer in the neck with a shotgun and nearly decapitated him. So, why ddid he do it? Because the grocer asked Ken's daughter to put back a piece of candy she hadn't paid for. People appeared fed up with this rampaging 6'5", 270-pound thug who thought he could get away with rape and wanton violence. So somebody or a group of somebodies shot him at least twice and emptied quite a few rounds into his truck. No witnesses, and even his wife who was in the truck refused to identify the shooter. Ken McElroy, link in description. On the morning of July 10th, 1981, townspeople met at the Legion Hall in the center of town with sheriff vests to discuss how to protect themselves. During the meeting, McElroy arrived at the D&G Tavern with Trina. As he sat drinking at the bar, word got back to the men at the Legion Hall that he was in town. Sheriff Estes instructed the assembled group not to get into a direct confrontation with McElroy, but instead seriously consider forming a neighborhood watch program. Estes then drove out of town in his police cruiser. Not getting paid enough for this shit. The daughter of divorced parents was raped to death by the mother's boyfriend. She was 6. Her father was contacting CPS and presenting evidence that the man was abusing his daughter under her mother's care. Nothing was done about it until she was life-flighted to Salt Lake, where she died of her wounds, and early in the investigation the mother admitted to letting her boyfriend play with her. The worst part is that because the abuser/murderer was part of the tribe, all he had to do was stay on tribal lands to not be taken into custody. So while the long process of an FBI investigation and the FBI jumping the correct hoops to make an arrest on tribal land, this man walked freely as long as he was on the reservation. Most people rejected the abuser/murderer entirely, but what hurt more is seeing the people who went out of their way to help him. His family tried to open a food truck where the highway passes through the res, so he could have a job. It earned a large protest considering the size of the town, and few out-of-towners stopped for tacos, so they fortunately had to shut down. The man's cousin was chief, so he was given a job in the dispensary. Some other members of the tribe who worked there walked out on the job and went to the council to try and stop it. Fortunately, as of now, the FBI has taken the mother and boyfriend into custody and they're awaiting trial. I've been called for jury duty twice now, and it's been cancelled each time. I feel so sad for the dad, who knew and needed help, but no one would do anything. I have some knowledge about family law, as my friend is going through a custody battle. When there is shit like this going down, you file for emergency custody. Kid says other house member is hurting them. You check for marks. If there are none, you take the kid to a kid therapist to get the story. If there are marks, take photos and take the kid to the doctor. If kid seems quiet and withdrawn, like there's something wrong, don't dismiss it. And of course, document everything. There's major red tape when dealing with custody with tribal kids, due to the US history of taking and abusing them in the past. A father held his wife at gunpoint and threatened to shoot her in the head in front of their 7-year-old daughter. Went on a wild police chase. He still lives in the town. There also was another dad who abused his wife and their children. Still lives here as well. About 50 to 60 years ago, my neighbor's grandfather chased away all minorities from our village. He set their houses on fire and destroyed the properties they left behind, so they never came back. There are very few minorities in my village to this day. Even tough, that guy is long dead. His grandson is married to the only doctor here, and he's a great neighbor. Eater. This got way more attention than I expected, so I'll try to clarify some things. This happened in Hungary and I don't know of any other similar cases here. The towns nearby have noticeably more minorities, and it got me thinking, why our village has only 2 gypsy families. When I asked my grandma about this, she told me this story, but little else about it. She asked me not to tell this to anyone, because only the elders know about it and some of them deny it ever happened. Apparently my neighbor's grandfather, let's call him Jay, was one of the loudest against the minorities, mostly gypsies, and he decided they had to go. So one night he set their houses on fire and they left. To be fair, I highly doubt this was done by a single person over just one night. It's important to note that my grandmother was a child when this all happened, so she might remember some details wrongly, and since nobody has ever talked about Jay's attack, I can't confirm what exactly happened. I for myself think that 20 to 30 families can't be thrown out like this overpass, so there are definitely some things that just don't add up. I hope this helps to understand it all a bit better, and feel free to ask more. That's some scary shit right there. Honestly, 50 to 60 years ago we had MLK and more protesting against the oppression. This was not long ago. Many of those people are still alive. Many people who were forced out of town. Many people who lynched minorities. Many people who saw it happen. This was extremely recent. The first black woman to attend an integrated school, Ruby Bridges, is 65. My own mother is older. Well, we had the 32-year-old son of a prominent member of town rape and sodomize a 14-year-old girl. Notable quotes from the kangaroo court. She was begging for it. You see the tits on that one. How was I supposed to know? She didn't try real hard to stop anything. Anyways, he got off with a slap on the wrist. 2 weeks later, he was found by cleaning staff in the local gym, beaten with a wooden broom handle shoved up his ass. Rumor was that it was a group of guys from the high school that jumped him after another chick lured him there. Honestly, a lot of people know who did it, but no one breathed a word. He survived, but left the area and basically just disappeared. This gives me a justice boner. I wonder if he tried really hard to not get his ass beat. Probably not. Normally I'm not for this type of justice, but when the better road fails you, it can lead to it or no justice at all. The broom handle probably never would have gone up there if he wasn't dressed like that. If he had just worn some proper overalls or a jumpsuit instead of shorts that could easily be pulled down, nothing would have happened. Those cheeks were begging to be clapped. Several young boys, age 9 to 11, went missing in the village, and it was suspected that a group of boys from the same school were responsible. They were heard talking about it on 2 occasions, about how they kill whoever they don't like. However, their parents apparently attested that they never let them out of sight outside of school hours. This group of kids was known for skipping school to sniff glue and drink alcohol BTW, but their parents obviously denied it. Only one of the 6 missing kids was ever found, in a creek, with injuries like he was stoned to death. Police said he fell down the creek accidentally, though. This was about 20 years ago in Europe BTW. Wow. That is messed up, man. Shame that the parents didn't care about their kids. Not so much a dark secret, but my town houses a bombing range that is still in use. No one has ever met anyone who works on it. No kids at school ever parents who work there. We never see planes or anything, but there is a guard at the gate. What was truly odd is that, if you ask a resident about it, we all say the same thing. Oh, the bombing range. There's nothing out there. Might just be unsafe, so they keep it guarded. Coal mine country PA. Lots of stuff happens. Guy was molesting his daughter and her friend. Went to jail for a few years. When he came back, his house mysteriously burnt to the ground with him in it. Another guy got caught selling crack to a couple of local kids. Yes, I'm that old. He was found in the middle of the street having been run over by a large vehicle repeatedly. A woman stole some jewelry from her elderly neighbor. She lost her hand in an unknown accident. Guy beat his wife. He left town with 2 hands that were destroyed by a ball-peen hammer. Teenage girl killed another girl's dog over a boyfriend. Now she sports a nasty scar across her face and is missing an eye. That and lots of smaller stuff. Justice is handled locally. The Purge, Justice Edition. But every day. This is over decades, but yeah. After all those incidents, how can they still dare to commit crimes there? Fucking Punisher is coming for their ass. Nothing with me, but when my mom was a kid she lived near a state park in New Hampshire. It's called Bear Brook. In the 80s multiple dismembered body parts were found in a blue barrel. An investigation happened, but the killer was never found. In the early zeros another barrel was found. Dating back to the time of the first barrel, the killer was recently found. His name was Robert Evans. The park is in Allenstown, if you want to look it up. The Bear Brook podcast does a great job of explaining this story. In Mom's seaside hometown, There's a decommissioned lighthouse offshore. Even though utilities to the lighthouse had long been disconnected and the building locked, residents have noticed the beacon turn on at late hours of the night, just for a few minutes, then mysteriously grow dark again. It happens so infrequently that the time of illumination can't be predicted. As I once described here, no one has figured out how or why this happens. Have any people been strangely obsessed with spirals in town lately? Or maybe a young boy that is weirdly good at digging holes and tunnels? Okay, I'm missing something here. What is this in reference to? Uzumaki, a horror manga by Junji Ito. Awesome manga. When my mom was growing up, a teacher and his wife were killed by an axe murderer. Someone broke into their house and killed them in the middle of the night. They found the husband in the house and the wife in the woods behind it, indicating that she tried to escape and was chased down. Really gruesome stuff. The attack was seemingly random, and they never caught the person responsible. My elementary school was named after the teacher, which wouldn't necessarily be morbid except for the fact that there was a dedication plaque that mentioned his murder in an elementary school. The 90s were fucking wild. I hate that axe murderer is a real fucking thing, and not just some horror movie bullshit. I returned home from school one day to a very powerful smell of gasoline throughout my neighborhood, and every emergency responder our town had. It was later found that a father of 3 little girls, who wasn't living there, tucked all 3 girls into bed and slit their throats. He gained access to the house by dismissing the babysitter. He then tried to blow the place up by flooding the basement with gasoline and calling the mom telling her come home. I've hurt the girls. Thankfully the mom went to authorities instead. If he was successful, my house would have blown as well. The father turned himself in and has been in prison ever since. The daughters were memorialized with a playground and the house has been torn down. I'm not sure what happened to the mom, but I've heard here and there that she has found peace in a new town. I live there, too. It's really sad visiting that playground, knowing the backstory of how it came about. It is nice how they tailored the different sections of the playground to each girl's interests, though. That's so sad but so nice. Everyone knows about the fun part of Centralia Park, the spooky mine fire, the ghost town, etc. What most don't know about was how divided the town became, and how they ganged up on the kid who fell in. Todd, how they harassed him, and accused him of lying for political gains. He was just a little kid who suffered a near-death experience and his own neighbors started a smear campaign against him. Well, that's pretty fucked up. At least he made it out alive unlike some others in this thread. I lived in a town of like 5,000. The only secret is the whole system is corrupt. One police officer got caught stealing painkillers, basically got reduced and deferred misdemeanor, so in like 3 months it was off his record and back to being a cop. A cop's son lost it one night, got in a fight with his girlfriend at the bar. My best friend was the bartender and kicked him out. 0.20 minutes later he is outside putting holes into the bar with a semi-auto. Amazingly nobody got hit. The cop's son also got his charges reduced from basically attempted mass shooting to discharging a firearm within city limits. I don't think that's even a misdemeanor. There's so much more. But the gist is corrupt people run the paper, the police station and the court. If you're in this circle you can do whatever you want, and if you're me, you will get sentenced to 1 year in prison for 1 gram of weed. I got the fuck out like 10 years ago. Kid's body got dumped down the road from where I live and no one knows who did it, just that they live here. Why did it sound to me like you were saying you did it? My hometown had a home of the KKK sign on its welcome to town sign until 2000-ish, maybe a year or 2 off. Harrison, Arkansas. Smithfield NC. IDK if that was the home of it, but still creepy. Some guy in the 90s murdered his girlfriend in the local park with a baseball bat. After she tried to break up with him, he smashed her head in and left the body. The Garnerville Pits Massacre. Multiple women murdered at a remote swimming area in an old abandoned quarry. 1 girl survived, but the killer was never identified. Not long later a woman was found dead in a storage shed owned by the sheriff at the time. They arrested a black man who was from out of town with no connections to the woman, and sentenced him to life. It later came out that the sheriff had been having an affair with the woman, but charges were never filed. Some speculate that the sheriff could be responsible for multiple murders including the bloody Garnerville Pits Massacre. Holy shit. Time to go to the FBI with this one. When did this happen? And where is Garnerville Pits? Any more details? I wouldn't say that it's kept secret, but it's so horrific no one really wants to bring it up. A young, early 20s mentally challenged woman was out with a male family friend and his friend who were a little younger, I think 18 and 19 at the time. They picked her up and drove her to the woods where they repeatedly stabbed her and then lit her on fire while she was still alive. She had rejected advances that they were making on her. Her body was found by hikers a few days after she was killed, and a few weeks later both boys were arrested. Both of them plead guilty, but offered no reason for why they did what they did. No shit, I was gonna post this exact story. I'm from the same town in northern Lancaster. It actually happened up the road from my parents and my dad almost found the body, but saw the hiker's car so went to a trail up the road. Those guys were in the grade below me. They're in a grade below most of us. Was in a teeny town in the middle of Nebraska and the chief of police's son beat the fuck out of my little brother with the local high school wrestling team. We tried to report it, and the cops basically intimidated my mom to back off, because it was boys being boys instead of assault. My childhood town was very small, about 1,000 people maybe. Our neighbor had kids, and then was arrested for the discovery of meth lab in their basement. Parents went to jail, kids went to foster care, still don't know how they are doing to this day. Poor kids. Hope they turned out alright.